Ladies and gentlemen, we're nearly concluding this session. There's always a problem with academic conferences. They need to be actually structured on data that are collected very slowly, and one needs to approve them and ratify them. Is what we received from Dr. Rosenthal was fascinating, but with all due respect. It concluded in 2014. The elections were in 2015. And the argument that was not perhaps said assertively enough, that Chief Justice Boehner said that something has happened since those elections in 2015. And I am claiming that not only has something happened, but something extremely grave has happened. An affront, attack on the coalitionary majority in the Knesset on our Declaration of Independence, and it will be remembered to the death, to the detriment of the entire history of someone who attacked and gnawed away at our liberal values and so much more. I'm not saying that democracy is endangered, or I'm not saying that perhaps there are sort of that what Ehud Barak actually thought was happening. But all I'm saying that we were actually established as a liberal country, or at least half liberal, and that there would be a liberal democracy, democracy with its fully fledged meaning, with Jabotinsky's meaning. And the liberal foundations are being gnawed away, destroyed by some promiscuous laws that are being enacted by the majority in the Knesset, that are led by a very minor minority of Israeli society, and it's very difficult to rectify that. That is an amazing sort of correction or amendment to the constitutional laws. I mean, one cannot, I mean, it isn't even according to the slate of Likud, because I haven't even got one. Basically, what is the slate? It is the Beit HaYehudi that is navigating the Knesset, and even they who are so extremists, that is a classical case of a lack of democracy, of a tiny minority taking over the indifferent majority, camouflaged by something totally different, totally severe and grave. So I asked the Democratic Institute, that is a non-partisan institution, and I asked them to give a few examples, and I would like to thank Dr. Yochanan Plesner, who is the president of the institute, and for all those who were involved in it. I mean, there's so many colors here. I'm having a little bit of difficulty actually sort of doing all this, says the speaker. Okay, because time is of the essence, it says, for example, that the legislation is actually harming and damaging the freedom of expression and association. They were not passed, these laws, but the damage was already done. One individual member of Knesset heard a muazzin from one of the mosques because it disturbed him, and suddenly there was this whole kind, without drawing a conclusion about what was really happening, what was the influence, and how this would detrimentally affect the entire Muslim population that we're surrounded by and sitting with. And they immediately proposed some kind of bill. So in other words, it was a boycotting law, which was a racist one, a detrimental one, a violation of rights. I mean, so who will prevent them? Will it be the Constitutional Committee? It's a joke to even think of it. We've got to change the name of the constitutional law. It should be called the Gagging Committee. And here, the Israel Democracy Institute has enumerated the various laws. They called it the boycott law, the Nakba law, and the NGO law, which they, by the way, called the actual transparency law. It's got absolutely no connection with transparency. It is a law that was designated to shame various NGOs that have not violated the law. They are identified with the left, yes. Chief Justice Banish did say that some of them are civil rights ones, which I do agree with, go overboard and sometimes come out with mendacious statements, and they sometimes go to all various foreign sort of authorities before coming to the actual Israeli government to talk about it. So basically, this was a shaming of the law. And now the third cluster, what they said is that legislation is actually gnawing away at the democratic procedure. It was Yair Lapid. They were trying in their way again to gnaw away at people's rights. And the fourth cluster, they said that it is actually detrimental to equality, especially to the rights of the minorities. Now, the next law, by the way, that was not passed, and that was already when it's already been published widely, even in The Economist, the one about the actual allegiance law. It was immediately sort of publicized. I mean, all these laws, they weren't actually passed, but they were already promulgated all over the New York Times. And believe me, they caused more damage to us than all the BDS movement has done together. They have caused more damage than even the BDS. Just the publication of them. And now, this has an impact. This offensive of the majority here, sometimes, I mean, the Prime Minister said about the actually arrangement law, and they said, the Prime Minister said at the time that if anyone acts according to it will be subject to criminal proceedings in The Hague, in the international law. And it was passed because the Beit Yehudi party wanted it. So here the minority is controlling the majority. So suddenly this gradual but continuing, ongoing deterioration against the actual courts of law. They should be considered a national arbiter, the court, but they weren't active enough about the settlements, and they didn't protect refugees who were asking for asylum. But I lost in my petition about these core issues, and I still do not understand the actual verdict till this very day. But it is an institution, and it arbitrates, it actually interprets in a society who, unfortunately, is on a slippery slope, and the data is extremely concerning. And we've seen destructive implications on Israel's democracy and a decrease in the prestige of the Supreme Court of Justice even before these laws were passed. Now, if we're talking about the actual status, about the Supreme Court of Justice, and again, this is a continued deepening of the rifts in Israeli society. We're talking about my whole chapter in my book about the educational system. I say that they are separate but not egalitarian, which is the opposite of what the Americans always use. The state normalcy of education, sort of normal track of education, which should be the spine of our educational system, has in fact become a kind of annex of it, of the religious state education. There's an involvement of political personages, cutting back on all the resources there are, Haredi schools that get a lot more than in the normal state schools, and the Arab ones are in even a worse condition. So is that legal? Definitely not, in my opinion. And I think that even these coalition agreements that are signed with those Haredi parties that allocate these monies, I actually think that they are criminal acts. But this is the way the modus operandi of this state that has existed since the days of yore, and I don't think that we can actually hope that there's going to be a judicial intervention here. Israel has declared that they are the state of the Jewish people, but they are not. The orthodoxy here is a minority. Whatever survey you carry out, there are a plethora of streams, and Israel is turning its back on the majority of Jews around the world and not enabling the citizens of Israel just to establish a family, and they're not allowing me to go and pray at the Kotel. They're not allowing me to marry the way I want to marry. All this happened after 2014. I think after next year, there is just one harbinger of one sort of little bit of tiding that I would like to be the harbinger of. There is a young Arab generation that is growing, that has changed its attitude towards Israel, and that one can sense everywhere. And I do not understand those Middle Eastern experts who have not seen that. And I have brought testimony from various public and proof from the Central Bureau of Statistics, from public surveys, from mayors' talks. And I've also calculated it and connected it to what Israeli Arab poets and authors have written. One of them even wrote it, in Hebrew. But do not be mistaken that it hasn't turned the whole Arab young generation into Zionists, but it has turned them into someone who looks at Israel with ambivalence, not only because of that, but because of the Arab Spring, of course, as well. So this ambivalence, you can build a state. You cannot build it on hatred and enmity, and there are many a sign that this is influencing people. Now, you can ask me, why do people actually vote for the joint Arab party, which I believe is destructive? And I can ask very moderate, national, moderate religious people, why do they do so? Because it has something, they are based on some kind of tribal connection and affiliation and some kind of other ideology. Well, I've been told that I must conclude. So beside all this bad news, there's also some good news. So if I need to summarize, I would like to say that the establishment that is becoming more and more extreme, that the reality itself, its economy, and society are going in the opposite direction of unification. So thank you very much.